Hello and welcome to the Angling Flaneurs. Today we're back in the homeland of South London and we're going to be walking around parts of Southwark. We're going to be concentrating on Southwark Street and Red Cross Way. We can view the rather magnificent building known as the Hop Exchange. Now, this was built in 1867 and was used as a centre for hop trading for the brewing industry. Now Kent nearby is the Garden of England and well known for hop growing, so hops were harvested in the farms of Kent and brought by railway to London Bridge Station or by boat up the River Thames and then stored in the many warehouses in the Borough and Southwark area. Luckily it was able to avoid the worst damage from the Luftwaffe bombing raids of the Second World War. Many other buildings and exchanges for commodities in this area were damaged. Dealings in hops took place under the open outcry system, and this continued until 1920, until fire destroyed the building. I'll show you now just a rough map of where we are in London. So we're just south of London Bridge. Hop Exchange has now been converted into a number of different uses, mainly retail and entertainment venues. There's a German beer hall stroke restaurant and that's worth a visit. I've been there a few times, so I can recommend that. But I just think it remains a wonderful building and I enjoy just looking at it, and it looks a real picture today on this wonderful October afternoon. And it's always nice to see a building with a picture of the Kent White Horse, the Kent Invicta on as well. Now we're coming up to a special site called the Liberty of Southwark. This is a 1.7 acre derelict site owned by the Transport for London TfL, and they in May 2017 appointed U&I to develop the area. Now this is a 200 million public-private partnership project to develop this area as a local cultural and social hub where people will live, work and visit, providing new jobs and housing for Southwark. It's not the first time that we've heard liberty used in this area. As you can see, from 1107, the Bishop of Winchester was granted sole authority over the liberty of the Clink and came up with various ideas to make money from forbidden activities, collecting rents and fees. When I think of the church and its activities going back in history, I always think of that wonderful episode of Blackadder, Blackadder 2, with the baby-eating Bishop of Bath and Wells. In London's many new developments, it seems necessary, and this is a good thing, to have an archaeological dig. We saw the amazing developments and discoveries with Crossrail and also with the new Bloomberg building on the old Temple of Mithras, just off Cheapside. And the discoveries here certainly don't disappoint. Now we see the real find now. Wow, this is something. This is a Roman Mosaic found earlier this year in February by archaeologists from the Museum of London Archaeology. And the Roman Mosaic is meant to date back to about AD 175 to 225. And it's meant to include a pattern known as Solomon's Knot and have dark red and blue floral and geometric shapes known as guilloche. I'm not sure I know really what a lot of that means, but if you go on to the Liberty of Southwark website, it will be much more informative than I am. The information boards here are showing you lots of the finds, over 2,000 years of history, lots of pottery, lots of plates, and you can see there cloth seals from the wool trade that was taking place here. This board, and something we'll see shortly, really does describe Southwark's wild side. And that mindset hasn't really changed. I work in the well-heeled and booted City of London, and when you cross London Bridge and you come over into Southwark and to Borough Market, you do feel that you're in a different land. You have a completely different mindset. That bridge really makes a difference to how you feel. We're standing outside the Boot and Flogger. Now, I've never been here before, and I'd like to go in, and the research tells me that this place operates under a special dispensation confirmed by James I in 1611, and the pub can claim the right to sell wine without a licence, dating back to a charter of 1567 granted by Queen Elizabeth I. And we can see another example in 1270 of Southwark's outlaw status. I just love this comment. The presence of hawkers beside the bridge on land owned by the Crown provides stiff competition to the City of London's markets and causes considerable irritation to the authorities. As a result, its citizens are banned from crossing over to Southwark to buy corn, cattle or other merchandise. To add to Southwark's earthy delights, in 1462 Edward IV granted a royal charter, the Southwark Fair, but this was held annually in September and it allowed farmers from around to converge to trade their produce and livestock. And also it was a place for strolling players and entertainers, but it also attracted a criminal element. It was well known as a place for vagabonds and pickpockets, and it was a place where the famous Winchester Geese could entertain gentlemen. The famous Winchester Geese, known because of their outfits, were employed by the Bishop of Winchester in what is the oldest profession in the world. Aptly and suitably, we move on to the famous Crossbones graveyard. This was a burial site for many of the Winchester Geese, who were employed by the Bishop of Winchester to improve the finances of the church. It was also known as a graveyard for paupers and had been in an area formerly known as the Mint, which was one of London's poorest and most violent slums. The graveyard was closed in 1853 and it was meant to hold the mortal remains of an estimated 15,000 paupers. The eastern part was dug up in the 90s during work on the Jubilee Line extension. In 1996, the writer John Constable, there's a name for you, had a vision in which the goose revealed to John Crow the secret history of Crossbones. This was the inspiration for the Southwark Mysteries, an epic cycle of poems, plays and lore performed in the Globe and Southwark Cathedral. This led to the creation of a shrine at the Red Iron Gates in Red Cross Way, dedicated to the outcast dead, and now a garden of remembrance. From 1996 to 2019, John Constable and Katie Nichols worked to reclaim and transform Crossbones graveyard from a derelict industrial work site to a world-famous shrine and garden of remembrance, a sacred place and sanctuary in the heart of London. And on the 23rd of June 2004, they conducted the first Crossbones Vigil for the Outcasts, which has been held at 7 p.m. on the 23rd of every month since. From 2006 to 2013, they worked with Andy Humm, the Invisible Gardener, to create a wild guerrilla garden with shrines, and from 2014 to 2019, with Bankside Open Spaces Trust, open a public garden of remembrance. And in the year 1550 we can see this very visual representation of the kind of activities that took place in this area of Southwark. The Bridge Without was an historical ward of the City of London, situated to the south of the River Thames where we are now, and it existed between 1550 and 1899. It was so called to distinguish itself from the ward of Bridge Within, which was on the northern bank of the Thames, so within the walls of the City of London, and now is simply called the Ward of Bridge. We can see St Saviour's House. Now we're in what was known as the old St Saviour's area of South London. Now this used to be a workhouse, and at one stage it housed over 500 inmates, doing all sorts of awful activities and living a pretty miserable life. If only the streets could talk to tell you about the terrible suffering in this area. The rather magnificent building that we see before us is another mission, or maybe another workhouse. It's called the Mint and Gospel Lighthouse Mission and was run by the Shaftesbury Society. The Shaftesbury Society was a benevolent society to help the poor. And in 1599, Southwark is still going about its merry business. The Globe Theatre is built, and theatres have come to the area for the same reason so many other enterprises came, because Southwark is on the fringe of society, and many of the theatres were forbidden from performing in the City of London. And here's another view of the City of London. And you can see the walkie-talkie and the cheese grater and numerous other skyscrapers. Now we've shown you a few of these over the past month or so as we've done our London Street Walk series. And this perhaps is one of my favourite recent views of the City of London against the backdrop of the railway line and the, shall we say, the grittiness of Southwark. And maybe Southwark's reputation as a good time place is coming to an end. After 300 rowdy years, Southwark Fair is abolished. The lively, crowded and at times unruly event, which had eventually come to last a fortnight each September and occupy much of the High Street, was banned as an affront to London. In the year 1762. Now I've always missed this building at 53 Southwark Street, the Menard Gallery. Now I must have walked here many times, walked past here, and I've always missed it. Now nowadays it's a theatre, 180-seat theatre with a restaurant and bar, and it's located in a former chocolate factory that was built in the 1870s by the French-owned Menard Chocolate Company. And according to London's Evening Standard, it is one of the most dynamic fringe venues in London. And it stages plays and musicals, live music and stand-up comedy. And I just think it is a truly magnificent building. And to think I've walked along this road for over 20 years and I've never seen it before now. It's now 1824 Southwark, and John Dickens, the father of Charles Dickens, the famous author, is imprisoned in nearby Marshalsea debtors' prison. While the rest of his family lived there with him, Charles boards with friends, and he would later feature the prison as a setting in Little Dorrit and the Borough area in Oliver Twist. We can see a reference to Bear Gardens, which is a place very close by. Now we've talked about the growth of the theatres here in the 16th and 17th century, Tudor and just after the Tudor period. Now, awful sport of bear baiting was very popular at that time and took place in many of the theatres, and this is a reference to that awful activity. This area is known as Southwark Quarter, so it seems like if you want to make an area more fashionable, just label it as a quarter. Is that me being unfair, or am I just cynical? I'm now on to Red Cross Way and I'm heading towards Borough Market. The street graffiti is very much adding to the ambience of the area. So in our time machine, we've now got to Southwark in 1889, and the liberty of the Kent is abolished when the Local Governments Act of 1888 merges all remaining liberties into surrounding counties. We're on to Stony Street and we'll soon be walking through Park Street on the way to Borough Market. Now we're going to see a famous film location. I'm only going to mention one film today. There's numerous films that have been filmed in and around Borough Market, so that film is Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. But before we do that, let's get back in the time machine and let's have a look at Southwark in the 1990s. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the emergence of the rave scene throughout the country, and this culminating in the second summer of love, where warehouses in Pink Street and surrounding Liberty continued to play host to many illicit parties. Right up until the year 2000, the many nearby walls were occupied by artists and musicians' short-lived studios. Now we're on to Park Street, and to our right, with the green door, you can see the hideout for the gangsters in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. And as I said, that's the only film I'm going to mention today. We may come back and do later vlogs and include some of the other films, and there's been many of them that have been filmed in this area. We'll soon be coming up to another one of my favourite London boozers. I know I often say this in many of my London vlogs, but this is true. It's the Market Porter in Borough Market. But first of all, let's look at some lovely restored properties in Park Street. You'll see Neil's Cheese Yard in a moment, and you'll see the Gentleman's Barista and other food and coffee and tea outlets. There's meant to have been a pub on this corner or a drinking establishment of some sort since 1638, and it was previously named the Harrow, but something happened in the 1890s that made it change its name to the Market Porter. And I'll give you some of the story. On April 21st, 1890, an Old Bailey jury heard how a man called Edward Lamb allegedly stabbed a marketeer named Alfred Harrow in the eye with an umbrella. The event was said to have occurred directly opposite the Harrow pub on the afternoon of February 15, 1890. Both men separately visited the pub at lunchtime. Alfred apparently overindulged, while the virtuous Mr. Lamb took no intoxications whatsoever. Eventually Lamb was acquitted, but it did make the pub change its name. The famous design of Portsmouth was located some years ago in Park Street, very close to the studio used for the Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels film. I was located just round the corner. We're now passing my favourite drinking establishment in London called The Rake. We've been here many times before, in it and past it, but we're not going to visit today as I need to be back at work. So that's it from the Flaneurs. I hope you enjoyed our brief journey through Southwark. So it's goodbye and we hope to see you soon.